In this video, we're going to cover Sega Genesis, Sega CD, Sega 32X, Sega Master System, and Sega Game Gear emulation on the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch. Alright everybody, we're doing an update vid here for a ton of Sega systems from the 16 and 8-bit eras. The Sega Genesis had such a great library of games, and I'm not gonna lie, I was really fond of the whole add-on thing it had going on, even if it wasn't very cost-effective back in the 90s. Today's day and age, it's just really cool to think about what the possibilities could have held if these things had succeeded a little bit better, but it's kind of besides the point. But thanks to emulation, we can experience all of this stuff on virtually anything, and that includes the Xbox Series X and S, which is what we're going to go over today. So let's dive in. So to get started with this buttload of Sega emulation, we need to get Retroarch installed on our Xbox Series X and S if you haven't done so already. Refer back to my How to Install Retroarch guide, link will be in the description below. Now pay special attention to the expanding dev mode storage section, and the advanced section here about how to access your Xbox's internal SSD and redirect Retroarch system folders to it, because we're going to be using that in this video for Sega CD emulation. The next thing you have to do is source games for any of the Sega systems that you're hoping to emulate. So Master System, Genesis, Game Gear, Sega CD, and Sega 32X. You could dump most of these systems with a hardware dumper. Actually, I used a Retron 5 recently to dump nearly all of my Sega systems. And then if you have a physical collection of Sega CD games, you can also dump those using the PC version of Retroarch, and I have a video guide on how to do that, which will be in the description below. Or, as always, you can resort to the shady part of the net to acquire these. I really don't care which way you do it, just don't ask me for illegal download links, because it ain't gonna happen. But once you have your games sourced, all we need to do is put them either on our Xbox's internal SSD or store them on USB. For today's guide, I'm going to be putting them on USB, so I'm just going to take them and drag them on over. Now, if you are planning on doing Sega CD emulation, you will need to source a Sega CD BIOS file. I do have a guide on the channel on how to back up your Sega CD BIOS using an EverDrive X7. I'm not sure if that works with the EverDrive Pro or the Mega SD, but if you happen to have a Mega EverDrive, I believe X5 or X7, this guide should apply to you for you to just easily get your own Sega CD BIOS file. Or again, you can resort to the shady part of the net to get it, but again, no illegal download links are ever going to come across my channel, so don't even bother asking. But once you have the BIOS file sourced, you just need to make sure that it is named BIOS_CD_, and then if you have a US BIOS, it'll be U, Japanese will be J, and European will be E. So just name it according to the region that you have. And once you have it ready to go, we just need to put it inside our Retroarch system folder. So access the internal SSD of your Xbox. If you made a network file share, it's as easy as just opening it up. Go into the Windows Apps folder, Retroarch folder, System folder, and drag your Sega CD BIOS right on in. And once you have that BIOS file in place and your games stored where you want them to be, we can close out of everything on the computer, take the USB drive out, put it back in our Xbox, and get loaded into Retroarch. And once you have everything ready to go ahead and boot into Retroarch. And once Retroarch has finished loading up, we're ready to begin loading into our Sega content. So one method of doing so is to go into Load Content. If you have your games on USB like I do, go to E, find your appropriate folder, select a core, tell it to run. Or if you have your games on the internal drive, they'll be located under S, Program Files, Windows Apps, Retroarch folder, your Made Games folder, select your Sega games, select the core, tell them to run. I am not a personal fan of this method, too many submenus for my taste, so I'm going to show you how to make a games playlist for all of these different Sega systems. So go down to Import Content on the main menu here, and go to Manual Scan. Now, for the content directory, navigate to where you have your Sega games stored. So again, if you have them under the internal SSD, go to S. If you have them on USB, go to E. And I'm going to start with Game Gear first because it's right here. I'm going to tell it to scan this directory. System name, I'm going to press up to get to Sega quicker. And I'm going to find Sega Game Gear. Now for the default core, I'm going to press up again to get to Sega faster. And I'm going to find Sega Genesis Plus GX. If you want to use the GX Plus widescreen one, you can do that as well. I'm not that interested in the widescreen stuff personally, so I'm just covering normal Genesis Plus GX today. Make sure Scan Recursively is set to on if you have your games separated into subfolders, and if you have them zipped up, make sure Scan Inside Archives is on. And then you can go ahead and start the scan. Now once that scan's complete, go back up to Content Directory, And scroll down, and we're going to move on to Sega 32X games. Scan this directory, system name, Sega 32X. Now the Sega 32X emulator is a different core, so we're going to change our default core over to Pico drive for 32X. And then same thing, scan recursively, scan inside archives, start the scan. Once that's complete, go back up to content directory. We're going to skip Sega CD for a second here and move on to Genesis games. Tell it to scan this directory. Go on in, Sega Mega Drive / Genesis. Default core changes back up to Genesis plus GX or GX wide. Scan recursively, scan inside archives, start the scan. Now, content directory, once again, we're going to choose our Sega Master System games. Scan this directory, change the system over to the Master System / Mark III. Same settings as before, so we can start the scan. And now, finally, let's talk about Sega CD, because this one's going to be just a little bit different. So, select your Sega CD games folder. Choose the system name of Sega Mega CD / Sega CD. Default core is going to be Genesis plus GX or GX wide. And now we need to set a file extension because Sega CD games use a bin queue format. And sometimes there are multiple bin files. So for example, my copy of Sonic CD has about 18 or 28 extra bin files, and I don't want that to come up in the scan. So I'm going to set a file extension to just pull up the queue file. Now, unfortunately, this copy of Retroarch has a broken on-screen keyboard, so you can't exactly see where you're selecting, so you kind of just need to move your D-pad, press A, and see what number pops up, and navigate from there. So I'm on the 3 right now, so I'm going to press B to delete that, and go down 1, 2, 3 to get to C. Now I'm going to move over 1, 2, 3, 4, up 1, 2, there's my U, and now over 1, 2, 3, 4 to get to the E. And once I have that typed out, I'm just going to press start. And now I can start the scan. And now that all of these scans are completed, we have a crap ton of new playlist entries on the left for all of these various Sega systems. And my Sega CD only has my Sonic CD queue file showing up as I want it to. But to play any of these systems, all you need to do is go into the playlist of choice, navigate down to the game you want to play, and tell it to run. And you are now running a number of Sega systems on your Xbox Series X and S. It's so friggin' sweet. So just a quick example here is Sega Genesis. Look at that, we got it. It's running. Yay, Sega. Hey, and look at that. Sega CD is running from USB even with multi-bin files now. How great is that? Friggin' slick. And Master System games running like an absolute champ. And looky here, Game Gear is too. Absolutely beautiful. And finally, here is Sega 32X running under that Pico drive core. Friggin' fantastic. And that's gonna do it for basic setup of all of these various Sega systems. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the more advanced core options available to us within these cores. We're gonna start off with Sega 32X here, just because it's by itself. So we're just gonna get it out of the way quick since we had it loaded up last. But going into our Retroarch quick menu, we can scroll down to options. And our first option is to choose our input device type from a 3-button pad or a 6-button pad. And you can do this for player 2 as well. So a lot of Genesis games use the 3-button pad, but if you want to play fighters, you could change it to 6-button for a better time. Next, we have the no sprite limit option. So this will remove the sprite limit that happened on Genesis when too many sprites were on a single scan line. Gets rid of the flickering. Next up, Mega CD RAM cart. If you have Sega 32X CD titles, you can enable this if you don't want to have to rely on the Sega CD's internal limited storage, but shouldn't really matter a whole lot. Not that many Sega 32X CD games. Next up, region. This is set to auto by default, but you can specify a specific region here. Core provided aspect ratio, you could choose between 4:3 or a CRT or PAR. I just leave it on PAR. Next up, show overscan. You can enable this to show the overscan areas of the game. Kind of interesting, but not really needed. Next up, you can overclock the emulated Genesis CPU up to 400%. Should help combat some hardware-induced lag. Try it out on a game-by-game basis. Not sure if it breaks things or not, but just be safe with it. Gonna skip dynamic recompiler. And next we have an audio filter that tries to more accurately mimic the sound of a Model 1 Genesis. So you can enable this if you'd like. And then you have a low pass filter percent to strengthen or lower the effect. We're going to skip frame skip because gross. Render, leave this on accurate. And then finally sound quality. This is set to the highest by default. Recommend leaving it there. But that's going to do it for the Pico Drive emulation side of things. So if you want to save certain settings for your Genesis 32X games, you can save them as a game options file here. Alright, now let's talk about the Genesis plus GX options here. So loading up a game under your Sega Genesis, Sega CD, Master System, or Game Gear, go into the quick menu and go to options. And we're going to cover system options first. This is one of the first cores we've covered that actually has the updated menu options for core options. Looks nice. But first up, system hardware. This is set to auto by default, but you can manually select what type of system your content is running on. System region, you can choose between all the various regions. Next up, system boot ROM. If you actually happen to have bootloaders for all of your cartridge-based Sega systems, you can enable them here. Not really needed. Next up, CD system BRAM. This is set to per BIOS by default, but I recommend changing this to per game if you have a lot of Sega CD games because it will run out of storage space really quick. And next, cartridge lock-on. We're going to skip this. If you have a copy of Sonic & Knuckles and want to do Sonic 3 and Knuckles and stuff like that, I recommend finding a hardware dumper that will let you dump the lock-on into a single ROM file. I was able to do this with the Retron 5, so it is pretty straightforward to get one of those versions of the game instead of relying on this lock-on stuff. Next up, video options. Core provided aspect ratio. This is set to auto by default, but you can change it between NTSC and PAL right here. Borders, can enable the borders around your content. Certain Genesis games ran at higher resolutions than others, so you might end up with borders like this, or you could just turn them off, so that way it's just your game. Next, you can hide the Master System's left border. If you're playing Master System games, that gets rid of that ugly border on the left side of the screen. Really helpful. Next, Game Gear Extended Screen. It runs it in Master System resolution mode. They're not meant for it, so you will need to have patches or something with the games to really take advantage of this option. Next up, Blarg NTSC filter. This is a built-in shader that lets you put certain processing effects on your videos, such as black and white, composite, S-video, or RGB. So a lot of Genesis purists like to use the composite video effect because it blends the backgrounds and things together, like the waterfall here on Sonic. These games were designed to take advantage of the composite signal to just increase the graphical effect. Otherwise, you end up with just the individual pixels like you see here. So, personal choice on that one, but you can achieve the effect if you want it. Next up, LCD ghosting filter. This is great for Game Gear games. Really mimics the ghosting that was found on them, or if you've ever played a Genesis game on a Nomad screen, it gives you that look. Many will probably find this undesirable, but if you like authenticity to the experience that you had growing up, I like enabling this one for my Game Gear games. Next up, interlaced mode to output. This is set to single field by default, which is what I think a lot of you will probably prefer, but if you want to have the normal look, you can change it to double field. We're going to skip frame skip. Next up, audio options. Master System FM chip. You can enable this or disable it here. It's set to auto by default. Next up, we can choose our Genesis's FM chip. This is set to MAME YM2612 by default. So the MAME chips are quicker, but on an Xbox Series X or S, we can use the nuked versions, which are more accurate. And then we could choose between the Model 1 Genesis or later Model Genesis sound chips here. So, Model 1. Sound output, you can choose between stereo or mono. And then you can turn on an audio filter to better mimic that Model 1 sound. Strength of the effect here, and then you can mess with preamp levels here. Next up, input. Unfortunately, our only input options here are light gun input stuff, and we don't have access to that on the Xbox version of Retroarch yet. Next, emulation hacks. We can remove the sprite limit, we can overclock the CPU, emulate system lockups, and address errors. Now, the last thing I want to touch on for Genesis Plus GX is in the Controls tab. Going to port 1 or 2 controls, you can change your device type between various different Genesis controller types. So 3-button, 6-button, and so many more. So it's set to auto by default. This has selected the 3-button and 6-button pads for me in the various games that I play. So this should be an okay option for you to keep. But if you need to manually set a controller, you could do it here. And then if needed, you could save game remap files as needed as well. But that's going to do it for core options. If you need to set an option for certain games but not others, like the LCD ghosting effect for Game Gear games, you can go up to Manage Core Options and save them as a game options file. But that's going to do it for all of these Sega systems in today's video. As always, if you happen to have any questions on getting these systems set up, feel free to ask in the comment section below and I'll do my best to try to help you out. But now if you could all do me the biggest of favors, and please be sure to hit that like or dislike button, just depending on how much you like today's video, and be sure to hit that sub button so you can see when new videos go live on the channel. If you'd like to further help support the channel, you can also check out that Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, or the join button here on YouTube. A little goes a long way to keeping this place up and running and bringing new content just like this to all of you. Big shout out to all of our current backers who have believed in what we are doing and have just been supporting us for so long. Y'all are amazing. Thank you so much for being our champions. Y'all are rock stars and just awesome, amazing. Just thank you. But that's gonna do it for this one. So until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, you all stay awesome and we will see you back next video.